The smell of a losing locker room is specific. It doesn't smell like sweat. Sweat is honest. It doesn't smell like deep heat. Deep heat is optimistic. A losing locker room, specifically one down by 20 points at halftime of a championship game, smells like sour Gatorade and silence. It smells like a funeral in a gymnasium. I squeezed the mop handle. My knuckles were white, the only part of me that betrayed the tension. To everyone else in the Apex arena, I was just Bill. Old Bill. The guy who shuffled around in a grey jumpsuit, wiping up spit and spilled ice, invisible against the cinder block walls. But I wasn't looking at the floor. I was looking at the whiteboard. Look at the data! The voice cracked. It was high, thin, and vibrating with panic. My grandson, Jason, stood in the centre of the room. He was 26 years old, the youngest head coach in the history of the league. He wore a suit that was tailored too tight and a tie that looked like an optical illusion. In his hand, he didn't hold a piece of chalk. He held an iPad. The analytics are clear, Jason screamed, tapping the glass screen furiously. We're shooting 12% from the perimeter in the second quarter. 12. The algorithm says we need to increase our arc by 3 degrees to compensate for the defensive closeout velocity. Adjust the arc. Why aren't you adjusting the arc? I dipped the mop into the bucket. The grey water swirled. Adjust the arc. Jesus. I looked at the players. The Sabres. They were giants, men I had watched all season. Marcus, the shooting guard, was staring at his shoelaces. Tank, the centre, a 7-foot mountain of muscle from Detroit, was staring at the ceiling, chewing his gum with a slow, rhythmic indifference. Davis, the point guard, was shaking his head, looking at Jason like he was speaking Mandarin. They weren't listening to him. They had tuned him out somewhere around the 6-minute mark of the second quarter when the opposing team, the Titans, went on a 14-0 run. Jason didn't see it. He was looking at a heat map. He was looking at red zones and green zones. He was coaching a spreadsheet. I wrung out the mop. Squelch. The sound echoed in the quiet room. You need to space the floor, Jason yelled, turning to Tank. The data shows that when you roll to the basket, their efficiency rating drops by 0.4. Why are you clogging the paint? Tank looked down at Jason. Tank had scars on his elbows from battling for rebounds in the projects. Jason had a degree in statistics from MIT. Coach, Tank rumbled, his voice deep. I can't roll. They got a zone trap. If I roll, Davis gets his head taken off. The numbers say the trap is a bluff, Jason snapped. Trust the numbers. I pushed the mop across the tiles. Swish, swish. It wasn't a bluff. I had been watching from the tunnel. The Titans were running a modified 1-3-1 zone. It looked like a trap. It smelled like a trap. And if you stepped into it, it snapped your neck like a trap. The problem wasn't the spacing. The problem wasn't the arc of the shots. The problem was fear. Davis, the point guard, didn't trust Tank. I saw it in the first quarter. Tank had missed a block, and Davis had taken an elbow to the ribs. Since then, Davis was hesitating. He was holding the ball a half-second too long. In basketball, a half-second is an eternity. It's the difference between an open lane and a turnover. It was a geometry problem, sure, but it was emotional geometry. And you can't fix emotional geometry with an iPad. Jason paced back and forth, his dress shoes clicking nervously. He looked small. He looked like a boy trying to fly a plane after only reading the manual. I wanted to shake him. I wanted to grab him by his skinny lapels and say, Kid, Stop looking at the screen. Look at their eyes. They're scared. They don't need a math lesson. They need a general. But I couldn't. I was just the janitor. I was just Grandpa Bill who needed a job to pay for his heart medication. We have 10 minutes, Jason shouted. We're going to switch to a 5-out motion offense. Maximize the perimeter shots. We play the averages. If we take 43s, the law of large numbers says we win. Marcus, the star player, stood up. He ripped the tape off his wrist. Law of large numbers, Marcus muttered. Man, we're getting cooked out there. They physical. They hitting us. And you talking about math. It's the strategy, Marcus. Jason threw his hands up. In his frustration, he tossed the dry erase marker. It was a careless throw. The marker hit the whiteboard, bounced off the rim, and skittered across the floor. It rolled. Click, clack, click. It stopped right at the toe of my work boot. The room went silent. Jason looked at the marker. Then he looked at me. For a second, I saw the recognition. I saw the little boy I used to take to the park to shoot free throws until the sun went down. But then, the mask of the head coach slammed back down. He was embarrassed. He was losing control of his team, and his grandfather was standing there with a mop bucket, witnessing the implosion. Bill, Jason snapped, his voice tight. Get that, and hurry up with the fresh towels. We're imploding here. The players looked at me. To them, I was a shadow. I slowly bent down. My back protested, a sharp spike of pain in my lumbar, a souvenir from a bus crash in '78 when I was coaching in the minor leagues. I picked up the marker. It was black, bold tip. I held it for a second. The weight of it felt familiar. It felt like a weapon. 40 years ago, I held a marker like this in the locker room of the Chicago Stadium. I was Iron Bill then. I had a whistle around my neck and 3 championship rings in my safe. I could draw a play in 3 seconds that would dismantle a defense that had trained for 6 months. I knew how to manipulate space. I knew how to make 5 men move as one lung, breathing in and out with the flow of the ball. But Iron Bill died in 1996. He died the day the scandal broke. The ethics violation, the recruitment money found in the locker. I took the fall. I took the fall for a kid who had a bright future and a sick mother. I lost my license. I lost my reputation. I vanished. Now I was just Bill, the guy who cleaned the toilets. I walked over to Jason. I handed him the marker. Here you go, coach, I said. My voice was gravel, low and rough. Jason snatched it. He didn't say thank you. He turned back to the board and started drawing frantic circles. Okay, let's go. Second half. We stick to the system. The system works if you work it. The buzzer sounded. Half-time was over. The players stood up. They didn't cheer. They didn't high-five. They trudged toward the tunnel, like men walking to the gallows. I watched them go. I watched the slump of their shoulders. I watched the way they avoided eye contact with each other. They aren't losing, I muttered to the empty room, dipping my mop back into the grey water. They're suffocating. You're choking them with information, kid. I finished the floor. I wheeled the bucket into the supply closet. I washed my hands. I looked at myself in the cracked mirror. Grey stubble. Deep lines etched into a face that looked like worn leather. Eyes that had seen too much winning and too much losing. Stay out of it, Bill, I told my reflection. It's not your team. It's not your game anymore. But the roar of the crowd vibrated through the walls. The Apex arena was screaming. It was a hungry sound. I grabbed a stack of clean towels. I walked out to the tunnel. The third quarter was a massacre. If the first half was a tragedy, the third quarter was a farce. The Titans came out smelling blood. They were a physical team, old school. They didn't care about arc velocity. They cared about putting an elbow in your chest and taking the ball. The Sabres tried to run Jason's 5-out motion. It was a disaster. They were standing around the three-point line, passing the ball back and forth like a hot potato, waiting for the perfect shot that the computer promised would appear. It didn't appear. Davis got trapped in the corner. Turnover. Fast break Titans. Dunk. Marcus forced a three-pointer from 30 feet. Airball. The crowd booed. Tank tried to set a screen, but he was confused by the spacing. Offensive foul. The score was 78-53. Down by 25. I stood at the end of the bench, holding the towels. The noise was deafening. 18,000 fans were booing their own team. It was a physical weight, pressing down on the chest. I watched Jason. He was standing on the sideline, just inside the coach's box. He was frozen. He held his iPad in one hand, but he wasn't looking at it. He was staring at the court with wide, unseeing eyes. He looked like a deer caught in the headlights of a semi-truck. He had run out of data. The algorithm hadn't predicted this. The simulation hadn't accounted for the fact that his team had lost their heart. He had no plays left. He was watching his career burn to the ground in real time. Time out. Time out, Sabres. The referee blew the whistle. It was a mercy killing. The team dragged themselves to the bench. They were gasping for air. Not because they were tired, but because they were panicked. Panic burns oxygen faster than sprinting. Jason stood in the centre of the huddle. The players sat on the bench, towels over their heads, hiding. "Okay," Jason said. His voice was gone. It was a whisper. "Okay. We need to..." He looked at his assistants. They looked at their clipboards. Nobody had an answer. I walked behind the bench. There was a puddle of sweat near the free throw line of the court, but I saw a Gatorade spill near Jason's feet. I knelt down with my rag. I was invisible, just the janitor wiping the floor. "We need a bucket," Marcus said, his voice muffled by a towel. "Coach, give us a play. They switch in everything. We can't get open." Jason stared at the whiteboard. He uncapped the marker. He went to draw a play. His hand shook. He touched the marker to the board, but he didn't draw. He just left a black dot. He was paralyzed. The pressure had snapped him. "I don't know," Jason whispered. It was so quiet I don't think the players heard it. But I heard it. I was 2 feet away on my knees, wiping the floor. "I don't know what to do," Jason breathed. He looked at the clock. 4:12 left in the third. Down 25. The season was over. His legacy was over. He would be fired in the morning. I looked at his shoes. Expensive Italian leather. Shaking. I looked up at the scoreboard. I looked at the Titans' defense. They were aggressive, overconfident. They were cheating the passing lanes. They were jumping everything. I knew the geometry. I saw the lines that Jason couldn't see because he was looking for numbers. The Titans were overplaying the strong side. They were ignoring the weak side corner because they knew Davis wouldn't throw the cross-court pass. They didn't respect the vision. I finished wiping the spot. I stood up slowly. I was right next to Jason's ear. I pretended to tie my shoe on the bench chair, leaning in close. "Run the blind dog," I whispered. Jason stiffened. He didn't turn around. "Isolate the weak side," I murmured. "They're cheating the lane. Drop tank to the low block. Back door cut. Jason turned his head slowly. He looked down. He saw his grandfather, the janitor, the old man who smelled of bleach and Bengay. What? Jason whispered, confused. I stood up fully. I looked him right in the eye. The noise of the crowd faded away. It was just me and him. I let the mask drop. I wasn't the janitor anymore. The slump in my shoulders vanished. My eyes, usually soft and apologetic, turned into hard flint. They were the eyes of Iron Bill. The eyes that had stared down referees and Hall of Fame coaches. The blind dog, Jason, I said. My voice was low, but it had the weight of a sledgehammer. It's an isolation set from the 80s. They won't have it on their scouting report. It clears the lane. Jason blinked. I don't know that play. Davis knows it, I said. He played for Coach Miller in college. Miller was my assistant. He knows the blind dog. The referee blew the whistle. Let's go. Time's up. Jason looked at the court. He looked at his terrified players. He looked at his blank whiteboard. Then he looked back at me. Bill, do it, I snarled, stepping into his personal space. Do it, or lose your career in 10 minutes. Stop thinking and start coaching. Jason stared at me. For the first time in his life, he didn't see a gentle old man. He saw a predator. He swallowed hard. He turned to the huddle. Davis! Jason shouted. His voice cracked, then found its footing. Davis looked up, surprised by the tone. Yeah? Jason looked at the iPad in his hand. Then, with a sudden, violent motion, he tossed it onto the empty chair behind him. Forget the motion offence, Jason said. We're switching it up. He grabbed the marker. He didn't look at the analytics. He looked at the hoop. Davis, Jason said. We're running the blind dog. Davis's eyes went wide. The blind dog? Coach, that's old school. We haven't practiced that. Do you know the spacing? Jason demanded. Yeah, I know it, but... Tank, Jason barked. Get your ass to the low block. When Davis signals, you seal your man. Hard. Marcus, you fake the V-cut and go back door. Davis, you hit him. They're going to jump the passing lane, Marcus argued. No, they won't, Jason said, echoing my words, though he didn't understand why they were true yet. They're cheating the strong side. The weak side is naked. We isolate it. The buzzer sounded again. Break! Jason yelled. The team stood up. They looked confused, but they looked awake. For the first time all game, their coach had given them a command, not a suggestion. They walked onto the court. I picked up my stack of towels. I stepped back into the shadows of the tunnel entrance. Jason stood on the sideline. He wasn't looking at his tablet. He was looking at me. I gave him a single, almost imperceptible nod. Watch the geometry, kid, I thought. Watch the floor open up. Davis brought the ball up. He looked at the Titans' defense. They were swarming. Davis hesitated. He looked at the sideline. Jason screamed, Blind dog! Blind dog! Go! Davis signalled. He held up a fist with the thumb tucked in. An old signal. Tank moved. He didn't drift. He didn't calculate arc. He slammed his big body into the defender on the low block. Bam! The defender bounced off. Marcus faked the high screen, planting his foot hard. The defender bit on the fake. Marcus cut. A sharp, violent line straight to the basket. The lane was wide open. The Titans' weak side defender was asleep, standing in no man's land, just like I knew he would be. Davis threw the pass. A bounce pass. Beautiful. Marcus caught it in stride. He rose up. Slam. The dunk echoed through the arena. The crowd went silent for a split second, then erupted, 78 to 55. It was just 2 points, but the energy in the building shifted. It felt like the air pressure had dropped before a storm. Jason watched the play. His mouth hung open slightly. He looked back at the tunnel. I was leaning on my mop, staring at the court. I winked. The dunk didn't just put 2 points on the board. It cracked the glass ceiling of the Apex arena. For the first time in 2 hours, the air moved. The 18,000 fans, who had been sitting in a sullen, booing stupor, suddenly inhaled. It was a collective gasp, a sharp intake of oxygen that sucked the vacuum out of the building. I leaned on my mop handle in the shadows of the tunnel entrance. My heart was hammering a rhythm against my ribs. Thump, 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 that I hadn't felt since 1988. It was the rhythm of the comeback. On the court, the Titans looked confused. Their power forward was shouting at their point guard, gesturing wildly at the empty lane where Marcus had just flown through. They were checking their mental Rolodexes, scanning the scouting reports uploaded to their brains by their analytics department, and coming up with a 404 error. The blind dog wasn't in the database. Jason stood on the sideline. He wasn't looking at his iPad. He wasn't pacing. He was standing perfectly still, watching the Titans bring the ball up. He looked over his shoulder. Just a glance. A fraction of a second. I looked at the floor spacing. The Titans were rattled. They were pressing high, trying to reassert dominance with aggression. I tapped the mop handle twice against the floor. Tap, tap. Jason turned back to the court. Trap, Jason screamed. Blue 42, trap the corners. The players didn't hesitate. They didn't look at the bench for a signal confirmation. They just moved. Davis and Marcus swarmed the ball handler as soon as he crossed half court. It was aggressive. It was risky. It was exactly what you do when the enemy is thinking about the last play instead of the current one. The Titans' guard panicked. He picked up his dribble. He floated a lazy pass toward the wing. Tank, my 7-foot centre who had looked like a statue in the first half, was suddenly a linebacker. He jumped the passing lane. He snatched the ball out of the air with one hand. Go, I whispered. Tank didn't dribble. He turned and hurled a baseball pass down court to Marcus, who was already sprinting. Lay up, 78 to 57. The deficit was 21, then 19, then 15. The third quarter ended with the Sabres down by 12. The fourth quarter began, and the arena was no longer a morgue. It was a gladiator pit. The noise was deafening. It was a physical wall of sound, a roar that vibrated the fillings in your teeth. I stayed in my spot. I was the invisible general. The opposing coach, a man named Rourke, who wore a 3-piece suit and had written 2 books on the modern defence, was unravelling. I watched him. He was frantic. He was swiping through his tablet, screaming at his assistants. He was looking for the counter move. But you can't counter a ghost. Every time the Sabres came down the court, Jason looked at me. If I wiped the floor with a circular motion, he called a motion offence. If I leaned the mop against the wall, he called an isolation. If I stood with my arms crossed, he called a box and one defence on their star shooter. It was a language of two. A grandfather and a grandson, bridging a 40-year gap in basketball philosophy with cleaning supplies. The clock ticked down. 5 minutes left. Down by 8. 3 minutes left. Down by 4. 1 minute left. Down by 2. The game had become a street fight. The analytics were gone. The shooting percentages didn't matter. It was about lungs and legs and who wanted to breathe more. The Titans had the ball. 45 seconds left. They were clinging to a 2-point lead. They ran a high pick and roll. Their star guard drove hard. Tank stepped up. Whistle. Blocking foul on number 55. 2 shots. The crowd groaned. It was a terrible call. Tank had been set. I clenched my jaw. Referees. They never change. They always guess in favour of the offence in the final minute. The Titans guard stepped to the line. He missed the first. The crowd screamed. He made the second. 3-point game. 38 seconds left. Jason called timeout. The buzzer sounded like a gunshot. The team staggered to the bench. They were exhausted, chests heaving, sweat pouring off them like rain. They collapsed onto the chairs. The noise in the arena was frantic. Let's go Sabres! Clap, 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 clap. Jason stood in the centre of the huddle. He held the whiteboard. His hands were shaking again. He looked at the play diagram he had drawn. Then he erased it. Then he drew another one. Then he erased that. He was drowning. He knew how to get them back in the game, because I had been guiding him. But now, the final shot, the kill shot, I hadn't given him a signal for that. He looked up. He looked past the players. He looked for me. I was standing by the water cooler, holding a stack of cups. I wasn't looking at him. I was looking at the Titans' huddle. I saw Rourke, the opposing coach, drawing furiously. He was drawing a perimeter defence. He was going to protect the 3-point line. He expected us to go for the tie. He expected the smart play. Jason caught my eye. His eyes were wide. What do I do? His face screamed. I didn't signal. I couldn't. The players were watching him. Rourke was watching him. Coach! It was Marcus, the star player. He had a towel draped over his head, looking like a boxer in the late rounds. Coach! Marcus panted. They're going to double me. As soon as I cross half court, they're sending the house. What's the play? Do we look for the 3? Do we go quick for the 2? Jason froze. He stared at the blank whiteboard. The marker hovered over the plastic. Jason stammered. We run the spread. We look for the open man. There ain't no open man, Marcus shouted, his frustration boiling over. They're switching everything. We need a set play. We need a dagger. The huddle was fracturing. The panic was seeping back in. Marcus looked at Jason. He saw the indecision. He saw the fear. And then Marcus did something that stopped my heart. He looked past Jason. He looked at the tunnel. He looked at the janitor. Marcus was smart. He had been in the league for 6 years. He had caught vision. He noticed things. He had noticed for the last hour that every time the play call changed, the coach looked at the mop guy. Marcus stood up. He walked out of the huddle. Marcus, Jason shouted. Where are you going? Marcus didn't answer. He walked straight up to me. He towered over me. 6'6" of adrenaline and suspicion. He looked down at my grey jumpsuit. He looked at the mop bucket. Then he reached out and took the black marker from Jason's hand, walked over and held it out to me. You, Marcus said. The other players turned. The assistants turned. Jason turned. Excuse me? I said, gripping my towel. Don't play with me, old man, Marcus said, his voice hard. I've been watching. Every time out. Every adjustment. He looks at you. You tap the floor. We run a set. You wipe the wall. We switch defence. You've been coaching this game since half-time. He shoved the marker into my chest. We got 30 seconds. Marcus snarled. Draw the damn play. The silence in the tunnel was absolute. The crowd noise was a distant hum. I looked at the marker. I looked at Jason. Jason didn't stop him. He didn't yell. He just nodded. A slow, humble nod of surrender. "Take it, Bill," Jason whispered. I dropped the towel. I took the marker. I walked into the huddle. The players parted like the Red Sea. They looked confused, shocked, but they were desperate. They would follow anyone who looked like they knew the way out of the fire. I didn't sit down. I stood. I grabbed the whiteboard from the assistant coach. I didn't wipe it clean with the eraser. I wiped it with the sleeve of my jumpsuit. "Listen to me," I said. My voice changed. The gravel was still there, but the subservience was gone. It was the voice that had commanded the '88 Olympic trials. It was the voice of Iron Bill. "They expect the 3, I said. I drew a big arc on the board. "Rourke is a coward. He plays the percentages. He's going to switch everything on the perimeter. He's going to push you out to 30 feet. I looked at Marcus. "You want the ball, right?" "Yeah," Marcus said. "You're not getting it," I said. Marcus bristled. "What?" "You're the decoy," I said. I drew a frantic scribble at the top of the key. "You're going to flash high. You're going to scream for the ball. You're going to jump up and down. You're going to draw 3 defenders." I turned to Davis, the point guard. "Davis, you have the ball. You dribble left, hard. Make them think you're isolated." I drew a line to the left wing. Then I looked at Tank, the big centre. "Tank," I said. "Do you remember the ghost cut?" Tank blinked. "The what?" "Of course you don't," I muttered. "They stopped teaching it when the 3-point line became God." I drew a line on the board. It wasn't a straight line. It was a loop. "Tank," I said. "You set a screen for Marcus. A hard screen. Bone on bone. Make them feel it." "Got it," Tank nodded. "But you don't roll to the basket," I said. "And you don't pop for the shot." I tapped the board hard. Click. "You disappear," I said. "You slip the screen and you step out of bounds on the baseline." "Out of bounds?" Tank asked. "Coach, Bill, I can't be out of bounds." "You step out," I insisted. "Just for a second. Behind the backboard, where the referee can't see your feet in the traffic. Where the defense forgets you exist because you are literally off the court." I drew the final line. "Marcus draws the triple team. Davis, you look like you're trapped. You pump fake. And Tank," I looked at the giant man, "you step back in. Right under the rim. You will be the loneliest man in the building." I capped the marker. "The pass has to be blind," I said to Davis. "Don't look at him. If you look, the defense shifts. Throw it at the rim. Tank will be there." I looked at their faces. They were staring at the board. It was crazy. It was illegal if the ref caught the step out. It was brilliant. "Give me 3 seconds of silence," I said. "Lull them to sleep. Then explode." The buzzer sounded. "Break!" I shouted. "Break!" the team roared. They walked onto the court. They didn't walk like losers anymore. They walked like they had a secret. I stepped back to the sideline. Jason was standing there pale as a sheet. "The ghost cut," Jason whispered. That's risky, Bill. If Tank gets called for out of bounds." "Risky is losing," I said. "Safe is for accountants." The Titans set their defense. They were spread wide, protecting the 3-point line. Just like I said. Davis inbounded the ball. 25 seconds. He dribbled left. He looked panicked. He acted it perfectly. Tank set the screen for Marcus at the top of the key. Marcus screamed for the ball. Here! Rock! Rock! 3 Titans defenders swarmed him. They were terrified of the game-winning 3. Tank slipped. He didn't roll. He stepped back. He vanished behind the stanchion of the basket. For a split second, he was physically off the court. The defense lost object permanence to them. He was gone. 10 seconds. Davis was trapped in the corner. He pump faked. The defender went up. Davis didn't shoot. He threw the ball. A hard blind bounce pass into the paint. It looked like a turnover. It looked like he was throwing it to the ghost of Christmas past. The crowd gasped. And then Tank stepped in. He materialized from the baseline like a monster emerging from the deep. He caught the ball. He was 5 feet from the basket. There wasn't a defender within 10 feet of him. He didn't dunk it. He didn't rush. He laid it in. Soft, gentle, swish. The ball dropped through the net with 0.8 seconds on the clock. The Titans froze. They looked around, bewildered. Where did he come from? The buzzer sounded. Bezz. Game over. Sabres win. The explosion of noise was physical. It hit me in the chest like a shockwave. The bench cleared. The players sprinted onto the court, burying Tank in a pile of humanity. Confetti cannons fired. The streamers rained down. I stood by the mop bucket. I didn't run onto the court. I crossed my arms and watched. Jason was screaming. He was hugging his assistants. He was crying. Then he stopped. He looked through the chaos. He looked for me. He started walking toward the tunnel, but he was intercepted. The press, the cameras, a swarm of reporters surrounded him. "Coach! Coach!" a reporter shouted, shoving a microphone in his face. "What a play! What a call! Walk us through that final set." Jason hesitated. He looked at the camera. Then he looked back at the tunnel. I shook my head. "Don't do it, kid," I thought. "Take the credit. Build your legend." But the press wasn't just looking at Jason. An older man wearing a fedora and a trench coat, a relic of a bygone era of sports journalism, was pushing through the crowd. He wasn't looking at Jason. He was staring at the tunnel. He was staring at me. It was Sal. Sal Moretti from the Tribune. He had covered the '88 finals. He knew my face better than my own wife did. Sal's eyes went wide. He dropped his notepad. "My God," Sal whispered. The microphone caught it. Sal pointed a shaking finger at the janitor standing by the trash can. "That's Iron Bill!" Sal shouted. "That's Bill Halloway. That's the architect of the '88 dynasty." The cameras turned. The spotlight swung. For 20 years I'd hidden in the dark. I had scrubbed floors and emptied trash to pay for my penance. But the light always finds you eventually. The flashbulbs blinded me. "Bill!" Sal shouted, running over. "Is it true? Did you call that play? That was the ghost cut. I haven't seen that since the finals against Detroit." I looked at the cameras. I looked at Jason. Jason smiled. He stepped aside. He pointed at me. "He called it," Jason said to the world. "Iron Bill called the game." The players stopped celebrating. Marcus looked over. Tank looked over. They started clapping. Slow at first, then faster. "Bill, Bill, Bill." The chant started on the court. Then the stands picked it up. 18,000 people chanting the name of the janitor. I didn't wave. I didn't smile. I just nodded once. The locker room was champagne and chaos. But eventually, the reporters left. The players showered and went to the after parties. It was quiet again. The smell of bleach returned, cutting through the smell of victory cigars. I was back in my grey jumpsuit. I was mopping up the champagne spills. Jason sat on a bench. The championship trophy was sitting next to him, gleaming under the fluorescent lights. He watched me mop. "Why didn't you tell me?" Jason asked quietly. I didn't stop mopping. "Tell you what?" "That you were him. That you were Iron Bill. I grew up hearing stories about you. Dad said you were a salesman. He said you hated basketball." "I did hate it," I said. "For a long time. The game broke my heart, Jason. When you love something that much, and it turns on you, you have to walk away." "You saved me tonight," Jason said. "The analytics, they didn't work. The iPad didn't work." I stopped mopping. I leaned on the handle. "You had to learn," I said. "You had to learn that the game isn't played on a spreadsheet. It's played with the heart. Numbers don't bleed, Jason. Numbers don't get scared. Players do. A coach doesn't manage stats. He manages fear." Jason nodded. He touched the trophy. "The owner's called," Jason said. "They want to offer you the job. Head coach, or at least senior advisor. Name your price." I looked around the locker room. I looked at the whiteboard, where the ghost cut was still drawn in black marker. "No," I said. "Why?" Jason stood up. "You're the best basketball mind in the building. You belong on the sideline." "I belong right here," I said, cleaning up the mess. I walked over to the supply closet. I put the mop away. I took off my yellow vest and hung it on the hook. "I'm retired, Jason. For real this time. I just wanted to see one last clean game. I wanted to see if the geometry still held up." "It held up," Jason smiled. "Yeah, it did." I walked to the service door. "Bill," Jason called out. I turned. "Can I call you? Next season? If I get stuck?" I smiled. The wrinkles around my eyes deepened. "Only if you promise to throw that damn iPad in the trash," I said. "Deal." I pushed the heavy door open. I walked out into the cool night air of the alley behind the arena. The city was celebrating. I could hear car horns honking in the distance. But closer, in the playground court across the street, I heard a familiar sound. Thump, thump, thump. A kid was shooting hoops in the dark, under a flickering street lamp. I stopped. I watched. The kid dribbled. He faked left. He pulled up. Swish. The sound was pure. It was the sound of truth. I smiled. "Swish," I whispered. I pulled my collar up against the wind and walked home.